Cheers, everybody. We are back, and I got some super impressive guests, as always, right? It's been like 3 weeks for a little bit of a hiatus, but it's glad to have the live podcast going again. And everybody in the chat, good to see you guys there as well. We are going to talk about perfect seasons, who's going to win the 250s, injuries, maybe some controversial stuff because we like drama, right? Drama kind of breeds influx of information and it helps everybody. I don't know, it just makes things more exciting. So without further ado, I've got Shane with me. How you doing, Shane?
Oh, not too bad. Good to be back on here. Thanks for having me.
We love having you. I love having you on here as well. And he is with the Moto Fever. If you, his link is in the description. He does a really good job with his YouTube channel, and so I want to help promote him. So make sure you go over there and subscribe because he's got a different spin, a different outlook on stuff than me. And then, as always, we have the mad scientist, Coach Rob Beams. How you doing, Coach?
Good morning, guys. Thanks so much for having me. And Johnny, it's great to be back. And I want to say hello to everybody in the chat room. Thanks for coming back and visiting with us this morning. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. And, Coach, I know we talked a little bit because a couple people were like, hey, we need to do the podcast sooner. And I needed a break. I needed a break. And I think that's important is that work-life balance. And that's part of the things that riders don't get a whole lot of is they don't get a whole lot of work-life balance. And if I have to bring up one person, let's talk about Eli Tomac. Let's talk about Jeremy McGrath, how he became, the winningest supercross rider. It's because he was like, hey, I'm taking the summer off. I need to relax. And I never understood that until now that I'm in my 30s. And you're like, wow, dude, stuff gets out of the way and you need a time to relax. And I believe Ken Roxon has a rejuvenated career because of taking a step back and doing the races that he wants to do. And he was able to win on a Suzuki multiple times. And truthfully, I think him being injured right now is probably one of those things where it's like, okay, cool, I get to sit back. Because unfortunately, Coach, you probably have heard this a lot, is guys don't slow down until they're injured. And I used to think injuries as like almost a blessing in disguise because you didn't have this thing in your head of like, oh, I got to go do a crap ton of motos or anything of that nature.
You bring in about 3 different subjects that need to be addressed one-on-one. The fact that they're not really doing drug testing. And you remember when Astafin was on Gypsy Tales talking about the idea that because the European races, or I think the World Supercross, was not, under FIM, Kenny was able to continue to keep his energy levels up. I thought there was a lot of subtle messages that were put in there, and the fact that MX Sports has taken in the drug testing, and whether or not they're actually drug testing, we're not going to go down that bunny trail today, but I think it does, essentially explain how Kenny, for the first time in almost a decade, has been able to finish the season. Sans the seasons that he got injured and then had to recover from it. But, we've talked about it even on the show. You see Kenny he'll win the weekend and get lapped the next weekend because he's so exhausted now that there's been the changing of the drug testing and all of that. And that's not me speaking about it. I'm just reiterating what his agent Astafin said on Gypsy Tales. So I think it's cool because now we're seeing, like you say, Roxon coming back. His contract's cool because he gets to do some select outdoors. So we get to see him a few times during the summer. Something else that you mentioned about the season, if you listen to the interview that Prado was doing after the press conference yesterday, he mentioned about when he was doing the GPs where they would literally have 2 to 3 months to try to shake down the bike. And he even commented, like, you only get 2 to 3 weeks over here, which goes back to the idea that it's a shame that the promoters have extended the season so long, and the way that they've I won't say that they've roped them in, but if you think about it, the way that the SMX, the way that the, I guess, bonus dollars at the end of the year are established, they're forced to keep racing all year long. Where before it was like, okay, I'm just going to exclusively race Supercross, as you alluded to with McGrath, or, I don't know anybody that just decided to become an outdoor specialist just because of the grind associated with it. But I thought it was interesting that Prado mentioned that as recent as yesterday, to your point. And I thought it was interesting that we're seeing more of Roxon based off of what Astafin had said in the Gypsy Tales podcast.
Shane, do you have anything to add to that? Because I know I do, but I like to talk.
So it's kind of a something I wanted to bring up. It's along the same lines, so I think now's a good time to just jump into it. So it's not necessarily about injuries, but I think there is something to be said about being able to have the time to take time off. And so I was listening to Joey Savacci. I'm actually really interested in how he's going to do this weekend. And one of the things that he had mentioned was obviously he couldn't race Supercross, so he essentially had a lot of time off. And with that, he was evaluating himself as a rider, obviously also trying to test the bike. But one of the things that he noticed is that he's not very good at sand riding. And so what he said was he spent the first month and a half just strictly sand riding. He was working a lot with Zach Osborne, ironically enough, and he really feels like he was able to bring his sand riding around. So we'll see how he does come Southwick. But my point is that he also mentioned I never had the time or the ability to just go and dedicate my time to make myself better and just lock in on something like that because we don't have a month and a half ever of downtime. There's always a little off season, back to testing, supercross, motocross, off season, testing, supercross, motocross. So, like you said, in a different way, when there's an injury, sometimes that time off could be what you need. But I think just like Coach Rob was saying, the season is so extended right now that there's so little time off that these guys get burnt out, even just not being able to be with their family or whatever the case may be. They can't work on little things like riding technique and stuff like that. So I think there is something to be said about how important time off is.
Real quick, Johnny, Michael corrected me. I think I mentioned Prado. He is correct. I was talking about Tom Vial's interview yesterday. So thank you, Michael. Go ahead, Johnny. Sorry.
No, that's why we have the chat here, man.
Yeah.
I love you guys. You guys catch me when I do something wrong all the time, and I'm like, oh, darn it, But
Yep.
that's how we
Thank
get
you,
better.
Michael. Yep. Thank you.
So with that, it's crazy because NBC, they were only offering like the extra $9 million if it was, hey, this is how much TV time we have. So I'm assuming what went down is you get a room full of a bunch of people that are investing in Supercross and they go, hey, here's our analytics. We're getting, I don't know, 100,000 views a race. Okay, we need to have 32 races so that we get enough so that they can justify giving that much money. And it wasn't even all their money. It was like 5 million NBC, then it was like 2 from MX Sports, and then Feld, they kind of split that, I believe, is what went on there. But speaking of like other people that have taken over sports before, I've read Lance Armstrong's book. He's still one of my heroes, even though he was a dickhead and he cheated like a motherfucker. But he did it, and that's just kind of the mentality that you have to be an elite, and people do it in business and whatnot. So I digress. But my point being is that he couldn't go out and win every race that was on the series. He just took time to rest and then just focused on peaking in 1 month of the year. Yeah, it was a torturous month, but that's what he was good for. He didn't want to then go to the Olympics or do any of that stuff. And what does motocross do and supercross? You got 17 races, then you got 10, then you got 3 more of super motocross playoffs, then you get like a week off, and then it's MX of Nations, then it's only like 4 weeks before the season starts back up. And truthfully, anybody that has ridden here, that statistically after about 5 to 10 races you have some sort of an injury. And speaking of like segue here, we have another small scenario of what is going on last year in Supercross, except for we don't have as many hurt riders, but we still have some top guys that are out. AC, is he racing Moto, or did he just retire altogether and that was it? Do we know?
He's done, and Tickle's coming mid-season to replace him.
Yeah. That, which is we're talking about Savacci. Tickle is one of those same guys that's probably pretty rejuvenated and ready to turn some heads. And also because how he exited the sport was not the best, because people kind of like took it from him, especially with some of the allegations when it came to cheating. But my point is, you've got Tomac out, you got Webb out, and we're going, okay, Sexton is really the only guy that's going to race against Jett.
You made some, if you don't mind, could I back the train up just a smidge?
Yeah. I spit a lot of stuff out.
No, when you mentioned the idea of Lance only racing the Tour de France, if I can get everybody to kind of zoom out to 10,000 feet, the reason why Lance was able to put all of his eggs into the Tour de France basket, because the Tour de France has put itself into a position where it is the pinnacle of cycling. It's, a multi-week race, but let's just call it a one race, even though it's over a long period of time, and all the attention that it garners. So if you look at the cycling world, you look at the gyros and all those others, the gyros and stuff, they have a lot of clout in Europe. But in regards to the global side of things, Tour de France has the clout. Johnny, if you jump into the sport you're enjoying now, triathlon, doesn't matter. You could be Ironman Lake Placid, you could be Ironman Kentucky, you can be Ironman Louisville, Tennessee, wherever you want to go, right? All these different states. The pros, no matter what, are always going to make sure that they're on point for Ironman Hawaii, the World Championships. And I think that's the problem that we have with our sport is these athletes are expected to be on their A game every single weekend and then spread that out literally from January through October. You don't see that in any other sport. And when you look at the idea, you mentioned, Johnny, the people, I like the word that you used, the keyword was that are investing in Supercross, that are investing in motocross. We need that, right? It's just like with WSX, with having those two extremely wealthy individuals coming in and taking World Supercross to the next level financially. You've got to have that influx of cash. When you come back to where we're at right now, I find it interesting that the people that are so-called investing in the sport are essentially investing in more of a presentation, but the presentation is soon to be without the people that make the show up. And we talked about this a lot last year. By the time we got to outdoors, it was a privateer heyday, which was great for the master pools of the world and stuff like that. But if we're really looking at the idea of the clout of Ironman Hawaii, if you look at the clout of the Tour de France, by the time we get to the end of the year, most everybody it's like, okay, it's just the law of attrition. And I'm not saying it takes away from it, but why are the promoters not recognizing that the value of the presentation are the people that are on the track, and the people that are getting shit on are the people on the track? And I'm just kind of baffled by that whole idea. You just said we're getting ready to go into round number 1. We don't have Tomac. We don't have Webb. We don't have Hammaker. We don't have McAdoo. Can you imagine if Jett gets hurt and Hayden gets hurt? Who's gonna tune in? Like they need to keep those two dudes in a bubble from Monday through Saturday.
Well, I want to know a statistic. How many people stopped watching Supercross after Ken got hurt? I mean, he's not the pinnacle of the sport, but he's got enough clout in there to where people are going, hey, I don't want to watch anymore if he's, and not to mention that it was towards, what was that, round 15 or something? And so you definitely saw a tick off round 15, 16, and even the final where, people were like, hey, I don't want to give away at this point, what is it, 32 weekends of out of the year for me to focus on this stuff.
Yep.
And coach, you have a good point. And people like NBC, they don't see here. Shane is back. We just had a movie down at the bottom. You were presented. You were the main focus here, Shane. So I want your opinion on this. My train of thought is just sheerly saying, how do you convince people with big money that we've got sustainability, and look at, we are continuously growing? And usually there's that saying, there's that E word, which is enough. When is it enough? Right. But that goes hand in hand with the word more. Everybody wants more. We want more viewers. We want more racing. But do we really? Because how many new fans are we creating by having a longer series, and how many people are getting injured and not having a sustainable career because of look at Pro Circuit, man. What do you think is the reason as to why their entire squad is getting injured? Between Levi Kitchen, well, McAdoo kind of ran into Kitchen is somewhat healthy right now. He should have won the Supercross title if he didn't have the East-West incident with his teammate, which that's just horrible to think about. McAdoo, we know that he's since round 1 with his balls sticking out. We knew something was going to go down. Seth and Faulkner. Faulkner just has been a ticking time bomb on stuff. But man, that whole squad, even from when AC was leaving the 250, he lost the series at the last race there in Vegas on his pro circuit. And that was kind of the downfall. I mean, you even go back to the Josh Hansen days where Josh Hansen was coming back and should have won the series, but some bad luck happened and it was on that team and he didn't.
Shane, I want to get your opinion. Go ahead, Shane. No, I want to get your opinion on this.
Don't forget about Christophe Pourcel and Trey Canard at Paula years ago. That was another one that he lost the championship at the last race.
Yeah,
so,
it just.
And Johnny, you have two separate subjects that you're speaking about: luck and health of the athlete. And this is the number one underlying plague of the 250 class is they're always being preached to. You've got to be calorically restricted. You've got to be light on the 250. You've got to get the whole shot. And if you think about how the body increases its integrity, if you look at the body literally growing from the inside out, bones getting thicker, muscles getting thicker, tendons and ligaments getting thicker, can only come from adequate amounts of food and sleep. So when these kids are brainwashed into the idea that you've got to be light to get the whole shot, look at how these, we've talked about it previously on the show, when Faulkner nose picked it into that, through the whoops, nose picked it into that corner. I'm not saying it wasn't a good hit, but it wasn't enough to shatter him. And you look at all these athletes, they are as fragile as a cracker. And I've talked to a lot of the parents of these riders when they're like, my rider's being told not to eat so that he stays light on the bike. And I think that's what's the underlying problem with the fragility of the 250 class. You can go back 2 summers ago, when Jay Coop was leading, and then remember when he had that really weird accident and ended up breaking his thumb, right? That summer, Star Yamaha did not have a single bike on the track. Remember, they had to bring in Kyle Chisholm because they were getting such huge financial ramifications for Monster for the lack of representation. I mean, they paid Chisholm a shitload of money that summer to race because it was the only 250. So if you look at the attrition of the Star Yamaha 2 summers ago, you look at the attrition of Pro Circuit now for almost 3 years straight, you cannot say it's because of a lack of talent. It's the idea that these guys are as fragile as a cracker, and it's almost an epidemic, to be honest with you, in the 250 class. Because if you listen behind the scenes, you have uneducated people telling these athletes, you've got to be calorically restricted. You've got to be light on the bike. They're sick all the time, either with Epstein-Barr or they have a virus of some sort. And when they hit the ground, they break nearly every single time. So it's not going to get any better.
I mean, I will be the first to say this is, Coach, you make perfect sense because honestly, I had an eating disorder when I was racing because, I was 125 pounds on a 450 and I just, I was like, I'm just working out all the time. I'm riding my bike all the time. And, it still kind of haunts me. My wife still gives me a hard time on stuff because sometimes I'm still being a little weird about stuff. And I ended up getting rhabdomyolysis 3 times while I was riding. And that, put me in the hospital all 3 times. And the nurses thought that I was doing cocaine or some sort of overdose on stuff. And I'm like, no, I just did 6 motos, or I did, 10-mile run and did 1,000 push-ups and stuff. And anyway, it is a problem. And that's something that if you're a younger kid out there, I've said this before, if you're going to race the 250, the ideal weight is between 145 and 165. If you're racing a 450, over 165 is, you need to be strong enough to handle a 240-pound motorcycle with gas. No ifs, ands, or buts. You're not usually the exception. You are the rule. And there's guys like Blake Baggett that can be super small on a bike, but just with their talent, they can still continue to do a 30-minute moto. But the number one reason why people get arm pump is they're not strong enough. Simple as that. They are not strong enough.
There's a caveat. If you're taking synthetic testosterone, that's the number one reason for arm pump.
Well, yeah, you're going to have blood. Creatine will help and stuff that too. You'll get way too much arm.
But think about it. When you put the testosterone into the system, what that does is the muscle growth supersedes the fascia that's wrapped around it. This is why when you're on synthetic testosterone. So I just want to make sure people understand that, because people will hear you say that and go, well, why do I have arm pump if I meet that weight thing? If you're taking testosterone, that's going to be always the number one reason for arm pump, hands down.
Okay. Coach is right. Okay, now that we know that I had like a little eating disorder, eventually when I got up to 175 pounds when I was doing drugs, when I was on testosterone, I couldn't do more than 2 laps. I was strong. You know, I felt like my passive aggressiveness. I wanted to get in fights with people more often. But I had to get off of the testosterone because the blood flow was just too much. But after that, it took a couple months. After that, I was incredibly surprised with just how much better, even to this day, because now my body weight, when I was at the peak of doing drugs, I went 125 to 175. Now I'm right around 155, coach. Now, because you've been coaching me with triathlon, I hover between like 148 and 152. You know, I try to eat quite a bit more because I don't know, you just work out more, so I'd lose more stuff. But even when I go ride now, I'm so surprised at just adding that extra 20 pounds. I don't get arm pump, even if
How
I'm not
fast?
riding as much anymore.
How fast did you put that? Would you say 120 to 160? How long did it take?
175.
How long
Yeah.
did it take for you to put that weight on?
10 weeks.
All right. Now I want the listeners to think about this. In a clinical environment, if you have the perfect scenario of loading the body with, you take the body and put it under adequate load, whether it be load bearing exercises like strength training, plyometrics, etc., and you feed the body ideally, the greatest amount of lean muscle mass you can create per day is 1 ounce. That's roughly 21 pounds a year. And you put on, what'd you say? I apologize. I don't remember your starting weight. 130?
Yeah, I was roughly around 130. Sorry, I'm trying to get us back both on
So
here.
you went to 130 to 170, 40 pounds in 10 weeks. So,
And then as soon as I started riding again, I
yeah,
lost 10 pounds instantly. I went down to 165, and then that was sustainable until I hit the wall after
yeah.
the whoops and kind of ruined stuff. But
Well, what's interesting along that thread of thought is, like, people have asked me if so and so is taking drugs, and I'm not living with them. I'm not going to sit there and falsely accuse anybody. What I would encourage you to do is go and look at images on the internet. When you look, because all the photos are time stamped, and when you see somebody's forehead starting to become square, you start to see their teeth gap, you start to see some of these, the way their body morphs. I'm not accusing them of taking drugs. The pictures validate that they're taking drugs. When you have somebody that has huge incremental improvements, especially at the pro level, yes, let's say there's 100 guys that try to qualify for the show tomorrow. They're all bad mofos on a bike. I mean, none of us would dispute that.
ironically, there is more 450 guys, coach.
Are there?
76 to 73. Sorry,
Okay.
continue.
No. The point is when you're looking at the idea of somebody's incremental improvement, if it doesn't make sense, you got to look underneath the hood. And people are like, oh, you're on a witch hunt. I don't care. I'm just answering the question that you guys asked. Is somebody taking drugs? Look at how their body morphed. Look at has there been an incremental improvement? I'll give you an example. There was a top amateur kid. He was like a 5 through 10 guy. If you went and looked at like 4 years of racing, and I'd heard through the grapevine that he got on Adderall through a facility that he was training at. And literally at the next 3 amateur nationals, the kid swept all 6 motos. Now, are you going to say that he just found some new riding technique? Did he dial in some special balance on his bike? I'm sure some of that contributes to it. But when you find out that somebody's taking Adderall, that's what Stewart got nailed for. And you look at the idea that these younger kids are now taking Adderall, you can see the significant improvement, because as you get closer and closer to the tip of the spear, we're all looking for those little tenths and hundredths of a second. You're not going to all of a sudden pick up 2 to 3 to 4 seconds. And that's exactly what this amateur kid did. And ironically, he's got himself now a factory ride. So that's where the parents will really argue with me. They're like, yeah, it may not be ethical, but it worked for this guy, this guy, this guy, and this guy. And I totally understand. Johnny, you and I spoke about that. My son's very good on a bicycle, and he wanted to pursue professional cycling. I said, then we've got to go find a doctor to put you on a PED program. And his eyes got this big around. I'm like, we're not going to go into this
Yeah.
ignorant. I mean, you got to recognize, is there anybody that's playing NFL that's not jacked? Is there anybody that's in college football that's not jacked? I mean, you're going to go in there and get destroyed.
What's funny is
They're
when you
gonna-
have that conversation with people, though, it's like a rite of passage for those sports. You just
Mhm.
boom, this is happening. And
Yeah,
for me, honestly, I'm not against drugs because it's sustainability for what the season requires as of right now. And
absolutely.
that's what people have to do to be successful, and they get rewarded for being successful. And success is when preparation meets opportunity. And so people are willing to do whatever they can to get the most prepared to make this shit happen. And I'm not alleging that anyone's doing it. I'm just saying, like, everyone should do it on the professional circuit because it's the only way to survive. Anyway, Shade, on that note, I wanted your opinion, but I forget what we were even talking about before because then it went on. Yeah.
Yeah, it's all good. I'd say just keep moving forward. I think we got it covered. I don't
Okay.
We
have
were
much to
talking
add to
about
that.
Pro
you
circuit
had
and
asked Shane about the curse of pro circuit, and you'd brought up Purcell and Kennard. That was awesome.
Oh, okay. Okay, so yeah, I mean, if we're gonna go back to that, one thing I was gonna add to that is that I think you see a lot of that, like you were saying, Coach, about how the riders need to be, slimmed down just to try to get off the start. And you see a lot of these guys that are not on factory rides or just not willing to do that, transitioning to the 450. You see Moran's doing it in Supercross. He was a 250 guy, and he just realized I can't build a motor every 3 weeks or whatever, and it's just way more sustainable for me to be on a 450. I don't have to, do all this crazy physical stuff. And so he went 450, and then you saw both Masterpool and Marchbanks do it last year, and they did it again this year. Not that, well, Marchbanks was obviously on the 250 Supercross, and then Masterpool, he's just been 450 ever since. But my point is that I think it's kind of a twofold thing with the 250. The engines are getting so extreme on the factory bikes that even a great team like Club MX is struggling. I know that Jeremy Martin came off the track last season in motocross and he was just losing it. He was really upset with the bike. And then you saw what Marchbanks did. He rode a couple rounds, I think one round, and he was like, I'm not doing it. And he went to the 450. So I think it's interesting with the direction the 250 class is going, especially professionally. Not only like you were making the point with what these guys physically have to do, but also what you have to do to build a 250 just to even compete, and you have to physically put yourself through all that. So that was one thing I wanted to bring up.
Yeah, it's a great point.
100%, because like I just shared with Coach, there is more 450 signed up for the first round than 250s. And honestly, that's super low. 73 to 76. Like, this number should be in the 90s.
Well, and that's in California. That's what's scary. I mean, that's the hotbed. If there's any place that there should be 100 plus, you would think it'd be there. Not like you're going to, a state that has a low concentration of racers.
This was interesting with McElrath, Robin, and Marchbanks on press day at Fox Raceway. Boom. That was a hard hit. And it looked like Shane did the first thing to Jerry.
And look at the dude, look at the flagger on the left, just standing there kind of halfway down. Let it play. Look at the flagger on the left side as you're looking at the video. Watch him. He's just standing there, still halfway down, doesn't run to the top.
I don't think there's a flagger even there.
Who's that to the left?
There is nobody. It's just one of those yellow cone.
No, keep looking. There's a guy running up the hill.
That's Jerry Robin.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
So
I can't really see
like,
it on the screen.
Yeah, it looks like to me Jerry probably fell, and then Shane kind of ran into him. And so Jerry's down there waving his arms, and then that's when Marchbanks comes over. Obviously, he couldn't see anything. And Shane was kind of trying to assess if he was needed to run left or right. And then once Marchbanks landed on Shane's bike, he immediately realized, all right, this is getting out of control, and that's when he sprinted up the hill.
Are there no flaggers on press day, Johnny?
There's a limited supply, if any, the nationals that I've been to, but supposedly there's.
Think about how brutal that could have been. 3 dudes taken out on press day because of just a relatively benign.
I know that this should have been avoidable. is what we're saying. I mean, I'm not here for a bitch fest of, hey,
No,
look, this is
no,
what's
no,
wrong here.
no, no, no. And
And
that's
I
not what
mean,
we're saying.
Motocross
No.
Action did the best thing by saying, hey, you know, here's an ugly wreck, and they're all promoting it. We don't see any of the other magazines, you know, especially the guys that own the series. Damn, that bike looks clean. But Racer
That
X,
looks so good.
For my little insight on going to the races a few times this year, people have been very open that Motocross Action is separated themselves in their own little genre, where there's like cliques going on with the media, and Motocross Action is not in there, you know. So therefore, my mind goes, let me walk over there. What are you doing,
Yeah.
Motocross Action? Let's be friends. You know?
Now, is that because they got ostracized, or is that was a conscious choice to disassociate? What have you heard?
It's there's always two sides to every story, but the basis of it was they didn't want to play with other people. They
Okay.
wanted to kind of play by themselves, and you know, there's nothing wrong with that. I think they're doing a wonderful job, and I truthfully, honestly, I every time I got a magazine, the first one as a kid that I would buy would be Trans World, just because it had sexy pictures in it. Number one.
Oh, yeah.
But then it was always between Racer X and Motocross Action, and so that was like a toss up. I felt like Motocross Action had, ironically, a better unbiased view over stuff, but then Racer X had a better overall view of what was going on when I would go by.
What I think is interesting being in Florida is, man, I remember you'd hear people talk about Trans World. We couldn't get it in Florida. It just wasn't distributed unless you went to the dealership. Just this week, I was in Publix, which is a large grocery store chain here in the Southeast, and Racer X is not on the newsstand, but Motocross Action and Dirt Bike is. And you know, it always astounds me because I'll pick it up and just kind of flip through it. I'm a little bit of a I'm still a big fanboy of the sport. So whenever I pick up a Motocross Action, I always look at what's on the back cover, which was interesting. It was Jeff Emig and ODI grips. And on the inside, that was one of the OEMs, I think. But I remember always picking up Racer X, and I'd always flip the magazine over because to me, Pro Circuit had some of the coolest, whoever their ad agency was or whoever they had in-house, their ads were the best. And they always had the back cover of Racer X. And then you always had the gear companies on the inside. Usually it was Fox. That was the easiest way to figure out what was going on in the sport. You know what I mean? And it was interesting when I picked up the Motocross Action. If you flip through it, it looks like it's only about 50 pages and 30 of those are ads. So there's not much content in there, but I don't understand how they can continue to keep their circulation up and get distribution with such a small magazine. And why is Racer X not out there? I'd love to, somebody who's in the know. I don't understand how the magazine industry works, but I remember when the magazines were 40 feet long in the grocery store. Now it's like 10 feet. That's all there is. So, I mean, we know magazines on their down and out, but how's MXA still getting that kind of distribution?
Yeah, I want to ask the chat, guys, what your favorite magazine is. So here, I'm gonna start a poll, and with that, Shane, your experience.
As far as the magazines or the different media companies?
Either or. I mean, because you're starting this,
Yeah,
you started a
right.
YouTube channel, you're covering good content. I really enjoyed your privateer. It wasn't the privateer, but it was the whole Stopwash Nationals, which for some reason I kind of just contributed with privateers for testing,
Right.
but there was
There's some factory guys out there.
quite a bit of factory guys there.
Yeah. So my thought, kind of back to what you were saying about Motocross Action separating themselves. I think one thing I've noticed, because obviously I'm trying to grow my media platform, so I'm trying to observe the successful ones and how they do their channels or different platforms, so that way I can not copy it, but just learn what people like. So one thing I noticed about Motocross Action is that it's not necessarily to do with their magazine production, but I think one thing that does set them apart is that a lot of their content, especially interviews and things like that, is coming from Josh Moseman. And while he's technically not racing like full time, he is out there, He's testing all the time, and he also does race some pro races. He's going to be racing Paula on a 350 actually, which I'm interested to see how that goes. I don't expect him to necessarily do anything spectacular, but the point that I'm trying to make is that when he approaches the riders, not only does he approach them with a perspective of a rider that's actually doing it right now, so he knows like, oh yeah, that turn was pretty crazy right there, I was surprised you did that or whatever, but he also has the respect of the riders, so he knows probably a little bit better than most when to approach, like when's a good time to talk to these guys, and then he asks the right questions. So even listening to the press conference, the public one, yesterday, he was asking some really good questions, and then if you watch their version, Motocross Action's version of the interviews, he just asked some really good questions. They bring up points that people don't normally get to. So I think that's one thing that really sets them apart. And then obviously, like you had mentioned, Racer X is basically synonymous with the people who own the sport here in America. So they can only say certain things. And then everyone else, I think Vital does good, Pulp does good, and they all have their own lanes. So as far as the magazine thing goes, I think it's pretty much a dead horse at this point. I know there's people still making them and people still buy them, and now you can even get the e-magazines, which is cool. And I'm all for magazines. I always enjoyed flipping through, and there's nothing like having that picture in your hand and just looking at it. But I don't think we're gonna see any magazines in the net 10 years from now. I think you're not going to see a magazine out there.
Well, because now pictures turn into video, and
Yep.
everyone kind of runs to social media platforms for that kind of stuff. And I just honestly, for our boy Trevor, just wrote my first article for one of his magazines, and I was like, damn, I just had a whole new respect for people that wrote stuff. I know I write scripts, but then I interpret them into Johnnyism, and I give it to you guys as content. And with magazines, it's you. My meetings with Beld and them saying that you're not a journalist, I'm like, yeah, trust me, I know I am not a journalist. But
here's the $1 million question for you. You know how everything comes back around. When will magazines be cool again? It's so fascinating to me.
Once AI writes all of them, where it's like just click,
good
click,
point.
boom.
Well, I think, I still have my, I'm going to show my age here. I still have all my albums. I've kept every single one of them, and it's cool now to see having an album is cool, where it went from album to, cassette, then to CD, then it goes to the Nano, and now we're coming back, and it's cool to have a turntable again. I'm waiting for, the big 14-foot speakers and the big sound system that's got the trays and the decks and the dual. It's all going to come back around. So when do magazines come back? I was just talking to a friend of mine this week. I don't know about you guys, but here in Florida, we used to have Cycle Trader. It was $1. 7-Eleven, you had Boat Trader, you had Cycle Trader, you had Auto Trader. Man, I would go and I'd look for bottles on the side of the road, get 5 of them, get 10 of them, be able to go down and buy the Cycle Trader. And just literally, I looked at that thing more than I looked at any school book, because I'm like, oh, look at that 81 full floater. Look at that bomber bike. Look at that Kent Howerton RM250. Look at that Mako 490.
The viewers, they say Motocross Action is currently their favorite right now. I mean, Trans World, that's really wasn't fair because they're no more. But interesting poll, guys. Interesting. I appreciate you guys that joined in for that. Sorry, Coach. I know about Cycle Trader, and then
we were just teasing about how that was a novelty for us as a kid, because you only got Cycle News once a week, so you couldn't wait to get home. You couldn't wait to open that mailbox. Was it going to be Cycle News? Was it going to be Motocross? Because we would get all of them. We had Motocross Action, we had Dirt Bike, and we had Dirt Rider. Because at the time, Racer X didn't exist. This was in '78 when I first started riding. And you remember when it was when you could call in and you pay a fee to get race results? This was even before 1-800-COLLECT.
I never even heard of that before.
Yeah. So you'd have the Anaheim Supercross or whatever, and on Monday morning you could dial into a number and it would actually give you the race results, because that was cool, because you didn't have to wait till Psycho News came out. And
that's kind of like people could dial in for double overhead or whatever the surf is for weather.
Exactly. Well, and then you think about Jeremy McGrath having 1-800-COLLECT. Get me anybody who's under the age of 20 and ask them if they know what 1-800-COLLECT is. They'd be like, what's a calling card? What's 1-800-COLLECT? This is a call from Shane. Do you accept? I mean, most kids would be like, what do you mean telephone? You tied to the wall? You had to turn it to dial it? So anyway, when do magazines come back? Let's date stamp this, Johnny. And you put it in your archives. And when magazines come back and there's 12 back on the newsstand, we'll be like, remember back in 2024, we talked about magazines being cool again? And Shane's got the biggest motocross magazine on the publication, or Trevor.
All right. Foreshadowing. This is what happens.
Okay.
Apple's new giant whatever. You see people walking around looking like idiots, getting out of their Tesla truck. That's when magazines are coming back, when everyone has one of those and they're opening up Motocross Action, and then from there they can like click and tab the videos and read the article and then swipe and do that. That's when magazines, but they're never going to be physical things again. Like truthfully, I have hundreds of books on my Kindle, but I still end up buying hard copies on stuff because just having a physical something is so much better than digital. But digital is so much easier to work with. Whenever I want to add something into one of my videos or something, I can just easily copy and then move it to a computer quickly. But
what would you say your percentage is? Because you're on book, what, 24 right now for the year? What book are you on?
No, I'm on 14.
Out of those 14 books, how many have you physically purchased and have in your library behind you? And how many have you listened to on audio? Just out of rough numbers.
So I've listened to 2 on audio, and then I have bought all hardcovers for the rest.
Yeah, I just think. Shane, how about yourself? Do you actually read the books or you do audio books?
I pretty much do all audio or just electronic copies, like read on my phone, because I grew up reading obviously regular hard copies. We didn't have much digital at the time anyways. I mean, as I was graduating high school was the time when like the Kindle and all that was becoming popular. So I technically could have gone that route, but just based off of time and ease of access, it's too easy to have it on your phone.
Dude, super. I trust you, dude. Like when I'm in an airport or something, it's hard to always have a hard copy of something. The Kindle on my iPad, because I kind of live and die by my iPad with notes and everything. So I trust you. And then I'm a big audiobook guy when I'm running, or I'm cycling, and I'm a big believer in 2x to 3x. I truthfully think it kind of zones you in and it forces you to pay attention more. Not so fast to where you can't understand them at all, but fast enough to where you have to really pay attention to what they're saying. And it's funny. I contribute it to like being in the zone, reading as like being in the zone while riding, where everything kind of goes away and you can really understand what they're saying. And then when somebody else tries to listen or you stop for a minute, you're like, holy crap, how could I even listen to that stuff? It's kind of cool. But anyway, I'm digressing. Look at how sexy this motorcycle looks.
Unreal.
With that number 1.
Now, here's something that's interesting. You know how when he was running during Supercross, he got to run the yellow like he's got on there right now? Like there's Deegan as well. When you look at the idea of after this weekend, he'll have the red plate. You've got the red plate with the yellow number. You just start stacking all this stuff up. How cool is that bike going to look?
Yeah.
And I think what would you call that number design? You know how like Hunter's running kind of the retro 9.6? What is the design of that number? Does anybody know?
I don't know, a swoosh.
Because you look at like you remember the number 4 that Ricky would run, that was so distinct, or James's number 7, and everybody's kind of got their own style. And I understand Hunter's, but I do not understand that one in a good way. I mean,
he's able to run the red plate because he's the points leader because it's round 1.
But isn't it interesting? You don't even notice that it's a red plate. It just looks like the Honda with the yellow number 1.
Yeah.
My point is how cool is that? He's got everything that you could possibly have. Number 1, yellow plate, Supercross champion, outdoor champions, won Paula every time he's raced it. No, and I don't know if you saw him in the press day, but my gosh, does he look good? Oh, looks so good.
So,
and the yellow. Oh, go for it, Shane.
I was just gonna say, back to the font question. What it's reminding me of is like a dirt track sprint car font that those guys like to use.
Yep,
That's what I'm seeing.
Do you know what that style is called though? The only reason why I ask is because because somebody's asked me about it, and I don't know, but that's very cool. Maybe someone in the chat does. It's cool stuff.
Yeah, it's like a free
But
gift.
for
Do
people
you
that
think he
don't know,
gets? Go ahead, Johnny.
no, go for it, Coach.
I was just going to ask you, do you think he gets beat tomorrow?
No,
I mean, let's just go right for the juggler vein. Does Deegan win, and does Jett win? I mean, those are the two questions that have to be answered.
I don't think Deegan's gonna win. I think he can, but I don't think he will. If I had to
Is
pick,
that-
I mean, there's like 5 or 6, there's like 6 guys that you got to keep your eye on the 250 class tomorrow, and then on the 450 class, it's just gonna be pretty much Jett versus Chase, unless Jay Cooper, maybe Hunter could get a great start, you know. But as far as, you know, if we want to talk, are we just gonna go right into, is Jett gonna get another perfect season? I know that was on your thumbnail, Johnny. So I was been kind of wondering that, and my argument for it is that Jett's in the same circumstances that he was last year, as far as there's about the same amount of riders. Obviously, we got his brother and Jay Coop coming up, but Tomac's out, so it's Sexton looks like the main challenger again. And nothing's changed except now he's more experienced. He knows all the tracks. He's been riding a 450 all year, and he's just more confident. So I would argue he has better circumstances this year to do it than last year. But obviously, it's still going to be really hard. You have to, you know, stay off the ground. Your bike can't break, all that stuff.
Yep.
But I actually brought that up a couple of days ago on my channel, and I asked that question, and I gave like 4 options. How many race wins or moto wins is Jett going to get? And so the first one being 22, and then, you know, I gave like a 4 race or 4 moto gap all the way down the rest of them. And the majority of the people were picking the third option, which was like 19 to like 15, and only 13% of the people it was like 1,300 people voted, and only 13% of them think he's going to have a perfect season. So I think people are ready to see someone beat Jett. I think they're voting with their hearts a little bit, and I think that he definitely could go undefeated. But yeah, I think the only person who's going to really challenge him is going to be Chase.
Agreed. And if this roster stays the same and we don't have Tomac and Cooper come back, it looks as if Jett is going to have a fairly easy, clean sweep of the series, unfortunately, because Sexton is super fast. I mean, Aaron is fast. Dylan, I believe, got second last year. He's fast, but he's on Phoenix Honda. Jason Anderson could potentially be up front. And Masterpool, I believe, let's go Masterpool with some podiums this year. Let's see him get some podiums on his HBI Racing, because now he's starting off on the team that he got on towards the end of the series last year. But yeah, unfortunately, the 450 class looks like the class to jump in if you were somebody like Jeff Walker, that is a 3-digit number, and you're looking to try to get some points, because look at how many 3-digit guys there are.
There's a lot.
Versus
I think this is going to be the summer
guys.
that I think Anderson's I think he'll have a good summer. I mean, he got through Supercross unscathed, which is the first time in a while. I think he's hungry to go outside, and I think he has something to prove. He's got that El Hombre attitude is back, and he does seem healthy. He seems happy. I think he's going to be somebody that'll shake it up. And I also think Jay Coop is going to be the guy that's going to be the one that catches everybody off guard. We know that the Yamaha platform is good. So I see Sexton having his hands full more with Jay Coop and with I'm drawing a mental blank who I just said. I'm sorry. I was just thinking about Hunter, because Hunter unfortunately won't be able to last the summer because he's still not 100% healthy, unfortunately. So you've got Jay Coop and Anderson. There you go. I think those are the 2 guys that are going to give Sexton the biggest fits. With Jett, you know, you look at the races that he got bad starts and he just simply ran out of time. He wasn't able to get through the pack. I don't think he's going to have that issue at all outdoors. Wider track, longer motos. We saw last year, literally, he fell behind Kenny, got up and ran him down. And it doesn't look like he's lost any of that polish. You know, to Shane's point, another year on the 450, that doesn't bode very well for everybody else. The only person that's going to give Jett fits is himself if he makes bonehead moves.
Yeah, no, Hunter was ending the series on a good note in Supercross. And truthfully, I think Hunter's a better MX rider than he is Supercross rider.
Yes.
So if he is healthy, that is
not.
going to be interesting. And yeah, you did leave out Justin Cooper because this guy is actually racing for a job, I believe, because
Yes.
Star Yamaha doesn't have enough money to pay him, Tomac, and Cooper Webb and Deegan
Yeah.
and the 9 other guys that are on the 250 class. So this
And
is
think about it though, where will he go? Let's kind of look at the end of the summer. Where does he go? Because you've got Prado and you've got Anderson, right, at Cowie. You've got the 2 Lawrence brothers that aren't going anywhere at Honda. Like you say, Shane, I'd have to agree. Husqvarna is the only place that really opens up for him with the exiting of
Christian Craig's probably out.
Yeah, Christian Craig. Thank you. I was thinking Savachi, but he's at Triumph.
Yeah.
But no, I totally agree with you. Where does he go? He's fighting for a job. It just seems to make sense that he'll go to Husky, unless all of a sudden, for some oddball reason, Craig comes out and just slays everybody this year. That's the only saving grace that he could have.
They would still go after Cooper over Craig just based off of his trajectory, I think.
I agree 100%. He's young. We know he's aggressive. I mean, it wasn't, how many years ago was it now? Was it 3 years ago? He was battling for a 250 championship, or is it maybe even 1 year ago, 2 years ago? Do you know?
He's always right there.
Yeah. And he's a better outdoor rider than he is indoors, in my opinion. And 100%. He's almost won a Supercross indoors, or championship. Now it's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
I think
the poll is live for the chat. So if you guys give your opinion on Jetson.
What do you think about on the 250? Go ahead, Shane. Finish your thought.
So I just wanted to add a couple things real quick before before we move on from those points. So with Anderson, one thing that I am noticing is that he is taking it pretty serious. I do think he could do pretty well. I don't think that he's that good of an outdoor rider when you compare him to his Supercross. But he's still going to be right there. I think he could easily get on the podium and maybe, like you said, challenge Chase. But one thing I wanted to point out was that he did make the investment to get everyone out, including like Brock Tickle. Literally everybody went out to Club MX at the end of the season to try to make his bike and just make himself better for the ending of the East Coast Supercross rounds. And then they also stayed there and did some motocross testing on their motocross tracks. And then back at the Stopwatch Nationals, he wasn't actually racing in the race, but they had 2 30-minute practice sessions, and he was motoing those. And he was, to me, like you see everyone out there and they'll ride and pull off or they'll just moto the whole time. But if they come up on a slow rider, they just work their way around. But he was not having it. I know that's probably just his attitude, but he came in hot on a slow rider and came around the outside and was just like revving the bike like it was a real lapper in a real race. And so I think he's definitely focused. I think he wants to do well. And I don't think he's considering himself a title threat, but even hearing him talk at the press day yesterday, I think he's definitely right there. As far as Masterpool, one thing I wanted to add with him is he's in a better situation as far as, like Johnny was saying, he's still on that same bike, same team as last year. And now he's coming in on a 450, where last year he came in on a 250. And then he did I think it was 2 rounds on the 250, and then he switched. Mm-hmm. And so he's able to be in a better situation with that. I was listening to him talk, and even last season on his 450 was his practice bike, which goes back to what I was saying about they couldn't afford to build more 250 motors for him to practice on a 250 because it was too expensive. So he had a 450 practice bike, and that's what he ended up racing at that first race. So he ended up just throwing his 250 suspension. It was just a stock 450. So he threw his 250 suspension on his 450 and went and raced it. And then they just they never tested. They never did anything. They obviously did what they could, but it was just fly by night, whatever, figure it out. It was once he started doing well. So now he said he's been able to test a lot more, but he's been having a lot of gut health issues, and he also tore his calf muscle. So he's only been feeling kind of good for the last 3 weeks or so. So it sounds like his fitness is kind of down, but the bike is working better. So we'll have to keep an eye on, say if he comes out and he's really fast, but he's fading.
Yep.
That's something that could be fixed come mid-season. And then as far as the Justin Cooper situation, one thing I wanted to add to that is that I think that Bobby Reagan really likes Justin Cooper. Obviously, he's been there his whole career, so they have a great relationship, and I do think they want to keep him. Obviously, Eli coming back is going to be kind of the deciding factor of budget and things. And one of the things that's in Cooper Webb's contract is that his salary goes way up this year, like next year. So that's part of the problem. So I do expect to see a smaller 250 team next year. I think they're probably going to run maybe 3 guys on each coast, if I had to guess. I know they're dumping most of their riders. The only people that I know for sure are on there is Deegan, Moseman, and I think Bennick. Don't quote me on that last one, but anyways, I think Cooper wants to stay, but he wants to be paid as like a rider. So
Yeah.
that's why I see him.
Well,
going
he's
to
the
Husky.
Marvin Muscan now, where he's just always been the bridesmaid,
Yep.
even in the 250 class. But that poll ended up saying that the majority of people think that he is not going to have a perfect season. But if I add together the yeses and wins every race, just the overall, just not the motos, that is somewhat still ish a perfect season. But it's interesting now that people are a little bit more on the fence about him actually becoming tying the record with James Stewart. And didn't Carmichael, did he have 2 perfect seasons as well?
He did.
Mhm.
Yeah, I believe he did too. So one last thing before we get to the 250 predictions, Tickle. How do you guys think Tickle is going to do on AC's bike coming in later in the series?
Go ahead, Shane.
Yeah, so I obviously got to see him firsthand racing the stopwatch nationals, and obviously it's a little bit hard to grade him on that. It's not that serious, and he was going against 250 guys. So from what I was seeing, he looks like he obviously he can still ride. That's not a question. His fitness didn't seem to be an issue. I mean, he won the second moto. The person behind him was Ryder DeFrancisco, which eventually became Julian Beaumaire. So they were both 250 guys. So they were pushing it, especially Julian, which one quick thing to add about him. End of his second moto, fitness looked really good. His intensity was way up and he looked fast. So just keep an eye out for that. But as far as Tickle goes, it's really hard to say. He wasn't really, I don't want to say he didn't look comfortable on the bike, but he wasn't putting the bike places that, like someone who's really looked comfortable on the bike. He wasn't laying it over. He wasn't throwing it into ruts. He wasn't like Anderson, for example. He's just out there off the lip, boom, bike's over on the side, into the rut, out of the rut. So obviously Tickle, I don't think he needed to do all that. But I don't look for him to be super high intensity. I think he'll be right around that 15 to 20 range when he comes back. But if he could get a good start.
Really? You think that low?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. Obviously, it's also hard to say on the attrition of the class. So like based off of the field we have right now, obviously we see the drop off. Like there's some really good riders, and then it just kind of you saw the triple digits. But I mean, you got to consider. So we have Jett, Chase, Anderson, Cooper, Hunter Lawrence, Dylan Ferrandis, maybe Eli Tomac because he might be back by then. Justin Barcia, James Stewart, Christian Craig, Ty Masterpool, Justin Hill. That's already 12. So I think he's going to be fighting for a top 10 at best.
I disagree. I think when he comes in, he could be anywhere between podium to top 5.
I think that'd be awesome, but I'm not seeing it.
I
think I think a great finish for him would be a 7th or 8th. That's like a win for him.
And that's where I have him as 5 through 8 when he comes back.
Okay. All right. Well,
only because, and everybody knows this, we see it every year. When you're away from that race intensity for an extended period of time, it's even though you're fit and even though you're riding well and you ride a lot, there's just, I mean, let's face it. I mean, he's riding with the guys on a regular basis, but it's just a different animal when you get geared up and it's under that race. I think 5 through 8 would be where he would slot in pretty consistently, which that's not a bad, we're not jabbing him in the gut on that one. I think any of us that are here on the show or in the chat room would like to be able to say that a 5 through 8 is where we'd slot in after not being on the track for 5 to 8 years or however many years he's been gone.
Moving to the 250 class. The 250 class looks like a class that you want to stay the F away from because of all the riders that are in here. Besides, some of the guys that got hurt with basically the entire pro circuit squad with Faulkner, Seth, McAdoo. Kitchen is still going strong, but how injured is he? I know Seth he's on the entry list here because of the sheer fact that they have these guys paid.
What's wrong with Kitchen, Johnny?
Well, just him being
his
somewhat,
ribs.
yeah, his ribs. So he's not near as in bad shape as the other guys, but anyway. But you got Ryder D, who I think is going to be fast. RJ, I believe, is going to be incredibly fast. Joe,
Who
Joe,
knows?
yeah,
Who knows?
Savachi, then Deegan and Kitchen. Who else do we have on here that is
Thrasher
worth?
should be on there, right?
Sorry,
Thrasher.
say again, Shane.
Nate Thrasher should be. Did you already say him? He should be starting it.
No, I did not. Thrasher and Benedict, but I truthfully think that Deegan is going to be the faster of those guys on the Star Yamaha. And the interesting thing about Deegan is it took him a while last year because everyone was going, "Oh, is Deegan going to be able to win races? Is he going to be able to fill that void of like what Mike Alessi did with what was it? The hype." The hype is real, or
believe the
something.
hype. Believe the
Yeah,
hype.
believe the hype kind of a deal. And towards the end of the series, we saw a couple blow-ups, I believe at Unadilla when he was smashed on his bike, but he ended up winning some races and he ended up becoming the super motocross champion. And so now he's the defending champion with that sexy looking purple background with the yellow number here. So I want to know who you guys think is going to win the overall series, and then also who you think is going to win Fox Raceway. And I guess since I'm just loaded with a mouth, I want to say that, gosh, Deegan comes out and wins Fox Raceway, but I want to see Tom Vial win the actual series itself.
Go ahead, Shane.
Yeah, so I would agree with that. I think there's really 6 guys who are. You could make a good argument as why they should be able to win the title right now. Obviously, we won't know for sure until we get through round 1. But I would say Deegan being from Temecula, which is like 5 minutes away from Paula, he rode that track all the time, and he's been pretty vocal about the fact that he loves that track. Not just because it's his home track, but he likes the way it breaks down. He likes the jumps. So there's a lot of guys who could win Paula on the 250 class. It's really hard to say, and I think it's going to be start dependent, obviously, because the field is so deep. So if Deegan can get out at least in the top 5 off the start both motos, I think he's going to be really hard to beat. But as far as the title favorite, Vial, I think he got like 6th in the points last season or something. He was pretty far back. So it would be a big jump for him to win the title, but I think you have to pick him as a favorite. I don't see how you can't, as far as if you see how much he jumped up in Supercross from last season to this season, and then you consider his motocross experience, obviously from MXGP, it's really hard to, not think that he's going to make that same jump or more. We saw him win a moto in Southwick last season. So why can't he just win a bunch of motos this year? Justin Cooper and Hunter Lawrence are gone, and he beat those guys last year. So Deegan's going to be a threat. All those guys, Hampshire could get in there. Shimoda definitely. I'm a little concerned about his ankle injury, but it looks like he wasn't really riding at Glen Helen when I saw him. He did like 3 laps. So I'm a little concerned about how he's notorious for having a slow start to his season, and I feel like he's setting himself up perfectly for another slow start with that injury. I saw they pulled Trey Kennard onto the 250 to try to help figure some things out. So that kind of also shows me that obviously you have Chance Hymas. He's got that knee injury that he's been dealing with. And then Shimoda, I think they're like, all right, we got to figure this out. We got a week, Trey, get on the 250. So anyways, I think Joe's a real title threat. I think obviously we saw him win the last race of last motocross season, and he always comes on strong. So I think he'll be a threat if he can at least get, be in the top 5 in points after the first 3 rounds. But I'm concerned that he might be outside the top 10 in the moto or something and just lose a bunch of points. So all that's to say, I think Vial's my favorite pick, but all those guys are right there. And I really think that it can't be understated that we need to watch Joey Savacci. He's had at least like 8 overall motocross wins that I could find on the 250 class, maybe more. So he's done it lots of times. He's capable. And all he's been doing all year is just grinding and getting ready for this. So he doesn't have the gate drops, but his bike's ready. He's ready. He said he hasn't had any crashes, no setbacks. So that Triumph looks fast. The motor package looks good. So if he can get out in front, you might have to see what he can do. But yeah, Vial for the title, Deegan for Fox Raceway.
You have an interesting point about Triumph with Joey Savacci. Definitely they get some podiums. And could we see a win from Triumph this year with Savacci?
I really think I think he's a really, really real threat for not just a moto win, but overall. And
Coach doesn't. Coach is saying F that.
No, I'm not saying F. Yeah, I'm not saying F that at all. I just think it's been a long time since we've seen Savacci on the track, and there's been a lot of up and comers that I think the gap is going to be quite significant. Would we be surprised if he goes out there and does well? No. I agree with Shane. I think the Triumph has validated that the platform seems solid enough to do it. It's just a completely different playground than the last time he was out there racing. And I would love to eat my words because I like Joey Savacci. I think he's a great guy. I've had a chance to work with him a little bit. He's a great guy all the way around, but I just think you're jumping into a young man's sandbox. And I think these guys are going to be crazy fast. I think it's going to surprise Joey quite a bit, and I don't think he'll be able to maintain the intensity that these guys will. But I would love to eat my words on that come next week. When you look at the entire, if we start with tomorrow, I think the Yamahas, you have to give the nod to them because I don't think anybody, again, you guys can certainly correct me if you disagree. I don't think that the KTM has been proven outdoors yet. We'll see how Sexton does on it. We saw last year Vial struggled with it. I know that obviously Cooper Webb ended up leaving because he didn't like it. I think for tomorrow, you have to give the nod to all the Star Yamaha guys because they're the only ones that have been on relatively the same platform. If you look at their consistency last year, opening round, if I'm going off of who's comfortable and familiar with their bikes, I'm going to give everything to the Star Yamaha crew. I don't think they sweep the podium, but I think they're going to be the most difficult. To Shane's point, Deegan loves that place. I think even if he gets a bad start, I think he's hard to beat. But in regards to the overall series, I'm actually giving the nod to RJ Hampshire. I think this is his year. He realizes that he's one of the older statesmen in the class. I think it's going to be a Donnybrook between Vial, RJ, and for Deegan. I think it's going to be probably one of the best 250 seasons outdoors that we've seen in a very, very long time. And what I like about it is I'd like to see RJ do well to give Husqvarna a little bit of a pat on the back because everyone's kind of saying that bike's a stink bug. But think about how cool that would be if you had Vial that could validate that the KTM's good outdoors. You have RJ that elevates the Husqvarna back where it needs to be. Then you have Deegan that does what we know he's capable of. We could see, and like you say, we would never be surprised if you saw Shimoda in the mix, Kitchen in the mix, any of the pro circuit guys if they're healthy.
Cody Schock, kind of a privateer rider that I think
not in the 250 class outdoors. I don't see it happening for the reasons that Shane said earlier. It's just the bike just doesn't compare. I think it's a little 100%. Better this year than last year, but I don't think it's remotely close to the other three.
Yeah,
Shane,
even with it being a Yamaha, those guys have been pretty vocal. Twisted Development does a great job, but it's not the same thing that Star has.
Yeah. And Johnny, you bring up a good point. If we go back almost 30 minutes, can you imagine if we did have Forkner, Handmaker, McAdoo, if we had all of the Team Green guys, if you had Joe Shimoda, to Shane's point, without that banged up ankle, and then you put all the Star Yamaha guys out there, I mean, it could be, we could have the top three could be different every weekend, literally, and nobody would be surprised. It reminds me back when you had Bailey and Ward and O'Mara and Stanton and Johnson, you could, whatever time frame window you want to look at, nobody would be surprised that the podium would change every single weekend. It's the talent is that deep. And
the chat definitely thinks Deegs, sorry, Coach, is going to win the entire series with Tom, RJ.
But you can't even disagree with that. there's no way that you could, with a straight face, be against that, that consensus. Just like I don't think anybody, especially after Vial, has kind of fought his way up. We talk about it all the time. Two-time world champion. He knows how to win races. Outdoors, obviously, more up his, his lane, as Shane said earlier. So now you put all that together, and now you're like, okay, by the time we get to round number 5, we still may not know who's got momentum in the series.
Deegan is definitely way more exciting to watch than Tom. And even I would say that RJ's title in Supercross was much more exciting than Tom. Tom just kind of did what he needed to do to win, but you were almost kind of surprised. Oh, wait, Tom's the champion. Go Vial. And I'm a massive Vial fan. So
you've been on his bandwagon since the day he got here. Even last year at Supercross, you had him winning Supercross when he first year.
It's funny that you got 2 adolescent kids here, and then you've got 2 mature, one kid has a family and kids and is touching on his 30s, and then Tom is in his early-ish 20s, but I would agree that he's more mature than the likes of Deegan and Joe. So it's
and also, Johnny, don't forget, nobody would be surprised if Jordan Smith comes out and wins the opening round. Now, I don't think many people have a lot of confidence in the fact that he'll make it through a season, because we've seen it every single year. He starts with a bang and ends with a fizzle. And here's the $1 million question. How deep into the series do we get before Jordan Smith blows Deegan off the track?
Oh man,
because he's going to Triumph next year.
He's out. He's out to destroy Deegan. And if he could ruin Deegan's championship, he's going to take it every chance he gets. Because Jordan's at that age where he doesn't give 2 shits about anybody, particularly Deegan.
Oh, after what has happened.
But how many rounds do you guys want to wager? Does it happen tomorrow? Do you think it happens by round 3? He's going to get blown off the track by Jordan Smith.
Something is going to happen. I agree with you. I will take it that inside of 20 motos, something is going to happen.
It's going to be ugly. What do you think, Shane?
I think that anytime that he can start in front of Deegan, obviously you're going to have to tune into that. My only concern is that I think Deegan's going to have a lot more speed, a lot higher, closing rate on Smith than he did in Supercross. And with like your point earlier with Jett, motocross is a lot more open. So I just feel like Deegan's going to be smart enough to know that, and he's going to come in on Smith every single time to where he doesn't have much way to retaliate. And then he's going to pull away before he can do anything. So given the opportunity, if everything lines up, I think Deegan better hold on tight, but I wouldn't be surprised if Smith has the intention but never gets to pull it off.
I would agree with that.
Some people in the chat are saying, why does Smith not like Deegan? Well, for one, he took him out last year in a heat race and made him go to the LCQ, and he did not qualify for the main event, I believe, and it was all because his teammate took him out for I don't even think it was for the race win.
It was for the race win, but because they tangled up so much, neither of them got it.
Oh yeah, okay. Correct. And then what happened at the last round this year in Supercross at Salt Lake City, Deegan took out Smith again, and then Smith he's kept it within himself. He hasn't been public about this, hey, I dislike this little kid, but Deegan has definitely poked the bear a few times with what he says as far as, hey, you're 30, you should not be in the 250 class anymore, and just some of the little drama that he totally gets from his dad, because that's how you're going to help win championships, is he's going to do the Jason Lawrence thing and try to get under your skin. And Deegan is perfect at it because he knows how to play the social media game. And the great thing about Deegan is he knows how to disconnect himself from the naysayers and everything, because this is his whole life. He's been conditioned, and he's got a thick skin because of his popularity in social media and how much followers he has. So it's hard to play that game because you're not going to beat him. And even if you try to beat him, well, he's got millions of people that are going to back up and fight him tooth and nail, even if he is clearly wrong. So it's what does Johnny do say? sorry, Coach. Sun Juice
Go ahead.
says in The Art of War that the best battles are the ones that you don't even have to fight, and
Mhm.
that's what Deegan has, is he doesn't have to.
Well, and Deegan already has the clout that it won't be if Deegan gets beat. The headline won't be that RJ Hampshire won. It'll be that Deegan lost. And it's kind of, that's when, I always call that the Tiger Woods rule, because I went to school with Chris DeMarco and he was in that final shootout with Tiger Woods. It doesn't matter if you win, it's Tiger Woods lost. And that's where Deegan's already established that level of clout. And that's really hard to establish. I mean, they've worked hard to get it, but that's going to be the narrative. It won't be who won, it'll be that Deegan lost all year long. Johnny, what's your thoughts? Pierce Brown's going over to Star Yamaha next year, yeah. What in the world is going on with TLD? You've got Frankie, who's Marvin Musquin's mechanic, is now running it. And I've heard that TLD himself is pulling all the funding out and not doing a team next year. What are your thoughts on that? Like, who's the other rider that's there? Is it Rider D or Jett? I always screw those up.
It's
I think it's
Rider
Rider
D.
D. So Rider D is going to be unemployed unless he goes and gets Jett's job at Club, because Jett hasn't even started a race yet. What have you heard, Shane?
So I was obviously at the Glen Helen Stopwatch Nationals, and Troy was out there. He sponsored that event. So there's two things I took away from that event that kind of were that at least I didn't know about. So the first thing was I was under the impression that Glen Helen didn't want another national, and whether that was the case in the past or not, they definitely do. So that was exciting to see. The other big rumbling was that Troy is potentially walking away from Gas. So my takeaway and understanding from that, which I'm obviously not super in the loop, but from what I was hearing around me at the race, was that it sounds like Troy's probably not going to sponsor the team and own the team. I think he's like a part owner, or what, I'm not sure his exact capacity with Gas, but I know he's heavily involved. And obviously we've seen him basically run different teams back when he had the KTM side. And I think, didn't he even have a Honda team at one point? So my point that I'm trying to make is that I think the Gas team is just going to become it's still going to be the same functioning team. It's still going to be under the Pure Mobility Group, but it's just not going to be affiliated with Troy Lee. So
Where do
whether
they
go
pit,
down,
where do they pit out of, Shane?
oh, like at the race, you mean?
Yes, sir. So if you've got KTM under their own awning and then you've got Husqvarna under their own awning, will Gas now have a truck there just for themselves?
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, that's
So who will the riders
pretty
be?
much how I'm picturing it, is that it's just going to be whatever title sponsor they can get, Gas. And it's
And
just
so who rides for him? Because we know that Pierce Brown's gone, and obviously Rider D is.
But does Rider D have an extension on his contract with?
Well, but he has no performance. I mean, like what Shane was saying with Cooper Webb, if you do as well as he did, his salary probably doubled or at least went up 60, 70%. Who rides for him? Do they pull somebody from the amateur ranks and put him there on the 250? Because I don't see Rider D blowing anybody's skirt up unless he smokes it this summer, but I don't see, he's not healthy enough.
I don't know. He looked pretty good he had good speed at Glen Helen, but what I was concerned about was his longevity. As far as late in the motos, he faded pretty bad. So I have to see how that fares come the true full season. So I would say that if I had to guess, I would think that it would just be the Gas team that goes on without Troy Lee, and you see Rider D and they grab someone else. Who that would be is really hard to say.
Well, when the pressure's on, sometimes there's performances to count. So we'll see.
But you would think though that Rider D would have been able to step up. I mean, he got some great starts all Supercross long, and then he just manages to find his way back outside the top 10, even top 15.
I mean, do people even get rides for Moto? I think it almost doesn't even matter unless you are a champion. But like, look at Dylan. You're like second last year, and then now he gets on the Phoenix Honda, and he is a champion 250 rider. And then there's just no room on a better team. And you've got guys like Masterpool that in Supercross can't get inside really the top 10, but in Moto can race with the big dogs and be top 5-ish. But he's on his own, somewhat privateer, helpful team. So it's almost as if like Moto, unfortunately, is you don't get hired from performances in moto. It's all about Supercross. And
That's
so
what
But this
now
is, and this is the reason why you saw a big push. A lot of people think it's because of World Supercross, and obviously that was a large genesis of this change. But think about it, if you're outdoor motocross, we've heard lots of rumblings that Feld was going to go ahead and extend their Supercross series and essentially squat on the outdoor nationals. So being a smart businessman, instead of try to fight with the enemy, become friends with the enemy, and now you have
dude, could you
what we have.
imagine 20 or plus Supercross races?
Well, that's what Feld was talking about doing, is they were going to, and I've heard that it got down to a very, very tight wire, that they were going to try to extend the Supercross series by 6 rounds, but then allow a slight little gap. So it was actually a brilliant idea. Let's just use the number 4, right? Race 4 rounds, have 2 weeks off, give everybody a chance to catch their breath. 4 rounds, 2 weeks off, and then squat right on top of outdoor nationals. But instead of the nationals, instead of Supercross being done in May, essentially be done the beginning of July. Then it would give the guys July, August, September, October, November, December to get ready for Supercross again. Well, obviously that didn't sound too good to MX Sports. So they went out of their way to make sure, wait, if we can't beat them, we need to join them. And that's where Davey was able to do a great job of building a relationship with Feld. Again, a lot of people think it's exclusively because of World Supercross. That's not the case.
I mean, I look at this is a little bit of what I talked about in my article that I wrote for. Anyway, you look at football and baseball, and then you have like a 4-month window where these guys are on, and you know how much attention that brings to have just 1/3 of the year. How cool would it be for motorcycle racing to be 1/3?
It's a scarcity principle. It works.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's why you have a baseball season, a hockey season, a basketball season. It goes back to what we were saying. Look at the NBA and look at the NHL and football and baseball and all that goes into it, right? They have their little window of time. And how many people do you know? I just think of my dad. I wish he was still with us. My dad lived for that football season, and then he lived for that baseball season, but they didn't overlap it, or if they did, it was for a brief period of time. And it keeps that enthusiast going. So they couldn't wait. My dad was a Chicago Cubs guy, couldn't wait for baseball to get resumed, and then he couldn't wait to watch the Bears. But you have two separate entities, and the performance on both of those were at an all-time high. Now, unfortunately, we're not seeing that. It used to be that way, where it was Supercross. We couldn't wait to see Supercross parlay itself out to outdoors. The problem is I'm going to use the word greedy. Supercross got greedy and wanted to expand how many races, and you have motocross. They got greedy and wanted to expand it. So then they end up running into each other in the middle, and now the riders end up getting the short end of the stick, unfortunately.
I think
the
it has
scarcity principle works.
Yeah, with greed. I'm super guilty about it, like with my other YouTube stuff with finance. That's like the biggest problem in that whole thing is just more, and it's followed by greed and power and control, which that happens throughout history. And yeah, that's
well, the only thing that I would like to on that thread of thought was think about how boring it got before the season even began last year, when the attrition rate was so high. And we've talked about it a lot on the show. It became a privateer's feeding frenzy, which was great because there was a lot of guys that got a lot of exposure. But for the growth and the popularity, it's like taking 5 of your top Formula One drivers, and they're no longer there. What happens to viewership? Go back to NBA days with Jordan.
It's definitely a show within the series. That's what it is. It's entertainment, and when you have the stars kind of gone, the entertainment dwindles.
But that's what I don't understand. How is that not being understood and kind of be paying attention to? If Michael Jordan got injured, people wouldn't buy tickets.
Yeah, I think things are somewhat like going to the last couple Supercrosses. The stadiums were definitely open. There was not near as many people sitting and staying tuned with there. And guys, I'm going to be fully honest with me, is that's why I need to take a few weeks off, like right there towards the end, because there's a lot of work that goes into this stuff, right? And you keep doing this constantly, there needs to be a break. It's a work-life balance that what's funny is like we're talking about kind of moto, but life too, because moto is a job. My wife just got her doctorate, and a lot of the doctors that she works with, there's kind of this inside hiatus where it's like these doctors are used to working 80 hours a week, but now this new generation of doctors are trying to be like, hey, I want to have a family and I want to enjoy it, and I'm going to try to stay around the 40-50 work-life balance. And so these older doctors are just like, "Rrr, rrr, rrr, these kids are lazy, they don't want to do stuff." And it's the ideology of how they were groomed and built, because statistically now we know that you do not think clearly when you're overworked. Same thing with these riders. When they're overworked, they're not going to have their best performances, and it's going to be almost detrimental. And it's going to be the same thing like when you have a rider on the track that's concussed, whether that's a Smith or a McAdoo, you're putting other people at risk, right? And so for the safety of the sport and the longevity of the sport, well, the safety of the riders is what I meant to say, is we're learning to learn more about taking a break. And now we're trying to somewhat undo what the previous generations, including myself, about riding, where it's just hammer, 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 hammer all the time. So I do think the problem is getting closer to being solved, but it's not going to happen for the next decade or so. It takes a while for this stuff.
Here's what doesn't make sense though, Johnny. If you look at a company that's starting up, let's say the three of us start a business, and we're going to pinch every dollar. We're going to maximize every dollar we spend. We're going to scrutinize every dollar. The company grows, and then you put somebody on salary. And instead of that person really producing a lot of output for the money they're getting paid, they've got a contract. They get a little bit complacent. And then what ends up happening is the company grows and grows and grows. And then there's all this misuse of funds, right? You're buying stuff, you're paying for stuff. There's a lot of money that's getting essentially wasted. Now you look at the idea that you just made a comment that the series is kind of pushed it. The two groups of promoters have pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed, and then the stadiums become less and less full. Johnny, we've seen this with Ironman. Ironman has done this to the point where they grew the brand to the point that they had so many events that their own events started to cannibalize their own events. They were too close in proximity. They were too close on the calendar. So you hit a saturation point where now the series itself, Ironman, was literally cannibalizing its own foundation, that the whole foundation plummets. So now what's going to happen is it's going to grow and grow and grow. They're going to get to a point where the stadiums don't fill up to a point where it's profitable. So then they're just going to axe the whole thing. And then we're going to go, how did this happen? I guess that's the part that I'm a little bit concerned about, is when you stop and you look at it. We talked a little bit about the scarcity principle. You look at the idea, like there was a comment here that I'm trying to parallel moto to baseball. You're missing the entire point. Why are baseball team owners able to pay somebody's salary of $40 million a year? Please zoom out and look at the economics of it. We've had this conversation before. You look at the proliferation of Formula One and how much money those teams make, and take a place like Dubai or Abu Dhabi or wherever it is, where they took their money and they built a Formula One racetrack. Well, why would people take their dollars to build the track? Well, because the series itself does such a great job with the series. They're looking at, I'll invest the money in this series to entice the series to come here, and we'll make our money from the series being here. How did we lose sight of the economics of all this? If you put out so many races, and we talked about it earlier, that the people that the fans are paying to see the show, the attrition rate of the show, the riders, is going up faster and faster. Why is the economic side of this not understandable? We've talked about it. Last year, by the end of Supercross, there wasn't a lot of people going to outdoors because the big guys weren't there. So now you start looking at all of the, and just for the sake of the listener, when you go and when you listen to the press conference yesterday, did you notice how they spent the first 30 minutes continuously telling us how much the numbers have grown? You had the people from NBC, you had the guys from Monster, you had MX Sports. All we heard about was how big the numbers were. If the numbers are that big, you don't need to tell us that, because the end user doesn't care. You see what I'm saying? I don't see a press conference of baseball coming out and they spend 45 minutes telling me about their TV ratings on baseball. Who gives a shit? I think, to me, somebody's trying to convince you that the sport is growing. Do you see I'm concerned about the economics.
quantity over quality, right? If you have more races, more this, you will see an uptick before people then go, okay, there's too much, right? And that's where I think the sport is right now is, yes, we have more viewership, and that's just because we have more races, right? We have this influx of this new exciting thing. And so here's this intermittent boost about stuff, and how long is it going to last? That's the question, right? And we'll see from the riders and the participants and the fans, truthfully. I mean, Shane, your opinion. Do you think the series is too long?
Yes. I think as a spectator, selfishly, I'd be fine with 40 races a year. Obviously, now that I'm getting into the media side, that's probably not going to be the case because I'm going to end up getting drained, just like the riders, probably not nearly as much. But my point being, I definitely understand. I think, what are we at right now? Like 31 American rounds or something like that. So, yes, I think it's too long. I think that the quality over quantity thing needs to be brought up. It's kind of like even with what we do. Say if if you have a YouTube channel like we do, you would rather have, say, one YouTube video that has 50,000 viewers versus, say, six that have, or five that have 11,000. So technically it's like, oh, well, we got 55,000 viewers, but okay, well, look at the effort it took to get that 55,000, or you could have just made one and got 50,000. We'll take the 50,000 because of the amount of work that it went to go into making those videos. So I think that, like you guys said, or even like your point, Coach, with Ironman, there's so many that these guys, like I have, even here in Southern California, I could go to A1, A2, San Diego, even Glendale's not that far. So there's all these races that I could potentially go to as a fan, that it's like, well, I'm just going to go to A1 and call it a year as a casual fan. So, but if there's only that one race, A1, and then boom, they go up north, then everyone's going to be at A1. It's going to be a huge event. And so I think there's something to be said about having more off weeks, especially during Supercross. I think that we could probably give up maybe 3 rounds of Supercross, drop it down to 14, and just make it 7 and 7. Still have 2 East-West showdowns, so that way those guys could still have a 9-round championship per 250 class. And then as far as outdoors, maybe just drop one and then add an extra off week in between and have it a 10-round series, and then give these guys a little bit bigger of a gap going into super motocross. And at that rate, you're only losing 4 rounds, but you could really help these guys have more time to recover. And then I think they should have another week in between supercross and motocross, because these guys really only get 1 week of testing, even though it's like 2 weeks, because they still have to fly back. And then say if you're in Florida, then you're only able to test until maybe Wednesday, and then now you're flying to California. So yeah, I think the series is too long. I think it needs to be spread out. And I think if we get rid of a few select events, I would hate to see that for like the Midwest guys that
California does
barely
have
can.
a lot.
Yeah,
You
but
need
it's like, keep the ones that are isolated, those rounds that don't have a lot. I would like to keep all I wish we had all 3 Anaheim, San Diego, and all that, just as a fan. But from a business perspective, I think it would make more sense to spread your stops around more. But logistically, as far as Supercross goes, it doesn't necessarily make sense, because it is more financially viable to stay in one place. You're not moving all that stuff. So it's hard to say. Even on the teams, it's easier because now you're not driving the whole team around. But as far as a viewership perspective, especially in stadium, I think they would do a lot better if they had less rounds in more select areas.
Well, Shayna, I'm going to be a little bit of devil's advocate here. If we have less rounds, instantly people are going to say, well, now I'm going to pay the riders and everyone less, right? And so
Nope,
that's,
nope,
I,
not
I,
true at all, Johnny.
I
Go
hear
ahead.
what you're saying, but that's
Go
the
ahead.
first argument. As a businessman, I'm like, okay, there's less. I'm not going to pay you more, because then the average goes up per race. And number 2, I know, Coach, you can interrupt me here, but
No, go for it. Go for it. It's your show. Go.
and well, you're a co-host, but also there's 2 different dynamics when it comes to analytics. And the TV companies, they follow a lot. Google is one of the highest grossing media platforms in the world. And what was one of the things they did is that they offered people to make content for them, and then they monetized it. But my point being is, the most successful YouTuber of all time, he has been blatantly generic when he goes out and just gives away his secrets. And he says, hey, it's much easier to spend 2 months creating a project that I'm going to get 100 million views on than within that 2 months make 100 videos that each get a million views. It's better for me. It's better for my sponsors. It's better for everyone all around. However, there is much smaller people that have proven there's a lot of, it's almost like what Jett Lawrence and all the riders have agents, right? There's social media agents out there that go, hey, give us your content. We're going to make 1,000 videos and your presence is going to be blown out. And they honestly grow much faster than if they were to have one big hit. And we see this in moto as well. Like I see it with my YouTube channel. I get roughly around 1 million views a month, but I make less content than Vital and Motocross Action. Like every day they're posting 3 or 4 times and their growth is exponential over mine. And it's because of quantity, right? And that is, there's a fine line there. And if you're smaller, especially with the sport being smaller, it's better to have the quantity out there before the quality follows up. But as we become more premier, well, now we need to focus on less quality and more, less quantity and more quality.
Mm-hmm.
That's the point. But I don't think we've flipped that yet. So here comes all the quantity of races, which is happening, if that makes any amount of effing sense whatsoever.
No, that's a good point.
It makes tremendous sense. But I agree with everything that you said, but change the perspective 1 degree. Everything that you talked about is based on cost benefit. So like you're saying, until you can get those big ROI dollars, you're going to have to spend more time to produce more volume. Then when the content gets more and more attention, you can produce less content because the value and the ROI goes up. And that's what I was saying about as a business owner, if I can cut my cost and maintain or even increase my output, I pay my staff more. So for example, all of my staff is paid on projects. We don't put a dollar value on hour, we put a dollar value on project. So think about it this way. If I hire you to make me a logo and you charge me $10,000 and in 40 minutes you send me a logo and I go, holy shit, I just paid you $10,000 for 40 minutes worth of work. Well, I have to take a spoonful of my own medicine, because what if that logo took you 4 weeks? Do I need to pay you, because you said you were going to create a logo for me in a week and I agreed to pay you $10,000. If it comes back and that logo took you 4 weeks, am I going to be willing to pay $40,000? No. Well, you can't have it both ways. I can't say that to me, I love the work that you do. I need a logo and I'll pay you 10 grand. That's a value on a project. So for me, I value time more than I value cash, because I can make money, I can lose money. You see the paradigm shift there? Mm-hmm. So if we can go back to like what Shane was saying, if he's got 11 races around him, he's a little less apt. He might miss one for something as benign as I was going to say a birthday party, but let's say it's just for a friend's birthday party, not somebody that really matters. You're doing the cost benefit to, well, I've got 3 other races I can go to. Well, now the races have gotten so diluted that the cost benefit isn't there for you. If, like Shane said, if there's only A1, come heck or high water, he's going to be there. So that's where you've got to constantly look at it from an economic standpoint. Johnny, when you first started out, it was content, quantity. You built your numbers, and now, I mean, it's still a lot of work. You're doing 12 videos a week, but that's where we always go back to.
My quantity has actually gotten up.
Yours has gone up, but why?
And I've seen the boost with the viewership and the subscribers and everything, And
but hold your thought. How similar are all 5 of your videos? Just take the number 5. How similar are those 5 videos? They're not. You have race analysis, you have technique analysis, you have track walk, you have this show. So the whole scarcity principle, you're just validating what we're speaking about. If you had 5 redundant shows, you wouldn't have the same amount. How many people here are like, can't wait, it's Friday, get to see Johnny. They say it in the chat room every week. Good to see you, Johnny. Good morning. Good to see you. If it was there every day of the week, they may or may not come in. Mm-hmm. So that's where we've got to get away from what's the value we're providing. I'll pay $100 a seat if the entertainment is good. And if I can only see it once a year, to me, that the $100 is, I don't look at that as being expensive, because I'm so excited about that, because the value of going there supersedes my $100 that I'll drop per person.
Do you guys think that the series is eventually going to do what football and some do, where it's like, hey, for $1,000 or $5,000, you get a ticket for every race you want to go to? Or have they already been doing stuff like that?
I don't know that they're doing it. Shane, do you?
No, they're not doing that. And I don't know, it's hard to say, because I mean, I think the person that probably could do that would be Feld and Supercross, obviously. It's something that they could potentially pull off.
Yeah.
The only thing that I see being a challenge with that is that, like, for example, if you have baseball, you have the MLB, and then they're all going to all baseball stadiums, and they have their whatever agreement that they signed to be in that contract. With Feld, it's more kind of I don't want to say fly by night, but they just go to whatever stadium they can get that year, whether it be football or baseball and different things. And so it's really hard to say, because the stadiums do change that they go to and things like that. So all it takes is for 1 year that this one football stadium, whatever it may be, is like, no, we got this other thing going on, we can't do that. We're not going to be able to do season passes, we can't offer that or whatever. And then now the whole thing's out the window. So I think it would be pretty cool to see that, but I think there's a lot of logistical challenges that would go into that. But yeah, no, they're not doing that I know of.
Yeah, that I know of. They haven't been talking about doing that either, but I could see that
But what would you get for that $5,000, Johnny? Let's say that it was $5,000, it was a golden ticket, you'd go to any race. Why would someone pay $5,000? Let's say there's, just for even numbers, let's say that there's 20 races and the average ticket is $100. So I can pay $2,000 and go to the races I want. What am I going to get for my extra $3,000?
Well, that's pretty easy. You just give them, the full Friday press day coverage access, the Jett Lawrence experience, the track walk, the VIP, and the pit pass, all that's included. And then you probably throw in some other nonsense and people will pay for that.
But did you see how that's value? I'm not looking at $5,000. I'm looking at the value. And when you say all of that, I'm like, here's my check. Here's my credit card. Because I'm not putting a dollar value that the Lawrence experience is $3,300 and this is this dollar. It's like, oh, you're right, Shane. That's awesome. The value for $5,000 cost benefit, I'm in all day. Here's my credit card. See, that's where I think this whole series has to be rethought from the standpoint of cost benefit.
And I think if we go back to, Shane, what you were talking about, Glenn Helen, from what I understand is MX Sports and them would be happy to have Glenn Helen back, but Glenn Helen has to pony up the money to have the national there, like what all the other nationals do. And I believe their disconnect there was, it was too much. It was harder for them to make a profit by paying like 100 G's or something to have the national there. So there was a disconnect between people's goals there. So truthfully, Glen Helen is a great track, but as of right now, I think there's too many races as is. So I don't know. Maybe it would take away from Fox Raceway or something, so that there's not 2 rounds there, which would be cool to see, because Glen Helen is a very professional track, very difficult.
But you also have to remember that, Johnny, if you look at that contract very closely, it's not just the cost of hosting the event, right? You've got to pay $100,000, or at least that was the price a couple of years ago. You got to pay $100,000 up front. No, I've seen the contract. It says $100,000 must be paid in it before the first person steps on the property. Then there's a $50,000 fee for MX Sports' crew to show up, and that money comes out of your merchandise. So you're already out another $50,000 out of your merchandise for a team that MX Sports brings in. And if MX Sports says that tree needs to be removed because it's blocking the visual of the race, you have to pay to have that tree removed. And if you don't, then MX Sports will remove it. And when they remove it, you get sent the bill. That's what happened with Motocross Does Nations at Redbud. That gentleman got into a boatload of trouble because MX Sports came in. They said they wanted all these trees removed. They didn't get the permits, and they got hit with a huge, and they got left hung with the bill. So it's not just about wanting. It's not that they're not willing to play. It's all these hidden add-on money's coming out this way. You think about
Yeah,
it.
it's
You
the
sell
disconnect.
you sell $100,000 worth of merchandise, and half of that's already going to MX Sports for their on-site team that you're paying for accommodations and travel. You start stacking all that up as a race owner, as a racetrack owner. How many races do you have to put on a year to cover $500,000 in cost? Think about it, not profit, just on the cost side, just to break even. Right? You have 100,000 up front. You've got a $50,000 work crew. You've got all the travel expenses. There's a long list of all the accommodations. You've got to give X amount of credentials out. That's all coming out of the race. The pro purse is coming out of the race track. That's not coming out of MX Sports. So it's just money's flowing this way constantly. We're back to cost benefit. And it's not just what the contract price is. It's all the add-ons and the what ifs that could come up that eat you alive as a track owner. Because you think about WW Ranch is no longer on the series. Why is that? Cost benefit isn't there. And as a result, they don't have any areas and regionals. So if you don't play at the big level with a national, you're not unfortunately going to be able to play at the amateur level. And the way that it's presented and sold is, hey, if you want to make a boatload of money, you want to be a regional. And they threw 2 layers on amateur motocross. Hey, if the 3 of us own a track and we want to be on the fast track to Loretta's, they'll give us a trial by giving us an area race. And we all know areas are a joke. All you got to do is mail your check in, do 1 lap around the track, and you're into the regional, right? You go to the regional. Well, now what they do is they sell it as, hey, if you get a regional level track, everybody's going to come train here because you're the last step before Loretta's. Do you see kind of the coercing of the whole program? And then what they do,
back to like the whole business model. You got to have money to make money.
well,
But
that's not my
if
point.
you're-
My point is if you don't play at all 3 levels, you're out 100%. So they're making money at an area, they're making money at a regional, they're making money at a pro level. And let's not forget who owns a TV contract for outdoors.
But coach,
MX
it's the
Sports.
scarcity principle too. They're the only
Where-
guys you can go to if you're going to be on the Premier League, because it's
No,
the
that's
only
not a scarcity principle. That's called a monopoly.
Okay, all right. You are right. You are right.
That's all. And again, I have no
But my whole
malicious
point
intent.
was
I'm just
is-
saying today we're talking about the economics of whether it be the scarcity principle or the value, the idea that the teams, the comment was in here that if there's less races, the riders will get paid less money. The only reason why the riders get paid less money is because they're willing to race for less money, right? Because if a team is able to reduce cost, they're able to put that money elsewhere. I don't see Roger DeCoster's salary going down if we have less races. You see the difference?
Well, that's because he will literally say, "No, I'm not working for
all
that
right.
money."
Well,
but my point is the riders, right? Because of
but the
of
riders
how
are willing to race for
ideology,
free.
They might actually sit there and go, "Sure, fine." Riders already race for free.
That's
right?
my point. That's my point. The truck driver's not going to the track for free. The team manager is not going to the track for free. The only person that's willing to race for free is the rider, because they throw it out there as, well, you're on a bonus program. If you win, you make $100,000 this weekend. Well, try telling the truck driver that in the mechanic. You're not going to get paid, but if we win, I'll pay you $100,000. And again, I don't want this to go down a negative thread of thought. I'm just saying, from a perspective, that's all I'm saying, is look at it from a perspective change. Because I want everybody to think about it as value for the growth of the sport. That's the cool part about it. Shane said it so eloquently. Hey, if you do a golden pass for $5,000, we'll layer all these perks. Well, those perks are perceived value. And if there's enough value, people will pay any premium. Well, then compensate the riders that are filling the stadium and decrease the cost for the teams. And guess what? You're off and running. You see the economics of being able to turn it around.
One thing I think we haven't talked about enough about this whole thing is that what about the viewership ratings that we would get if we had less ratings, that we had a better rider attrition rate, that those guys, Ken Roxon is still out there. He's healthy. Tomac is healthy. Webb is healthy. And these guys have a chance to go back and recharge. And they're not always so worn down that when they do crash, they break. So
Yep.
that's hard to quantify since we don't have any data on what that would look like. But that's something worth considering, is that, say, if every 3 weeks we're taking a week off, what does that look like as far as the riders staying healthy and the viewership going up or not dropping off based off of the fact that their favorite rider is still out there?
Let me disagree with you politely, Shane. You actually have an example that your idea is a home run. It's a grand slam, and that's the GNCC, which ironically is owned by the same promoters. And here's what I mean. They race an off-road race every 2 weeks. So think about it. You race on Sunday, you can rest Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. You can train Wednesday to Wednesday and do a 3-day taper and race on Sunday. And if you look at the starting list at round number 1 in the premier class, every single rider is still racing. The starting grid has consisted of every single top guy for all 9 rounds. So to your point's exactly right. If they staggered it every couple weeks, you have a better chance of having this show be at full capacity, which now makes the marketing of that easier, and it makes it more lucrative based on the scarcity principle. They're not doing a GNCC every week. They're doing a GNCC every other week. They're selling the damn thing out, has great viewership. You're exactly right, Shane. Your illustration is a grand slam. And the ironic part is the same promoter is doing it elsewhere with tremendous success. But because the cash flow on this side is so good, known as a monopoly, why would you want to change it? So you've got the exact example of what it should be. And if you listen to what Vial said, when you're racing GPs, you've got 4 months to rebuild, test the bike, shake the bike down, especially when you have a new platform change. I can't imagine what Chase Sexton was going through for that 6 weeks that they had off, going to a completely different chassis. I can't even begin to imagine what that was like.
His head was spinning.
Yeah. Well,
one thing I did want to mention, that since he brought up Vial, is I know that he's the only guy who hasn't changed frames or chassis from last year. So everyone else is on the new one, and he's like, I'm not having it. I'm not changing anything. Keep the bike the same. And that's another reason I think we should look out for him this season.
That's a great point. So when I made that comment earlier that Star is only one on a familiar chassis, I have to take that statement back. I didn't realize. Now, here's a question for you. How in the heck does he have enough clout that he can put his foot down and say, I'm not changing frames? That's pretty big.
Well, it's because they have I forget the technical term, but I know they have the 20, I think, what is it, the 24 and the 24 factory edition or something. So they have the 2 frames, and the factory edition one, I believe, is considered the new one, or whatever the case may be. And that's what everyone ended up switching to eventually at some point. But they technically can run either one. And Vial is basically the only one. I think it was Ian Harrison was saying that to get him to change anything is like pulling teeth. So even a clicker or anything, he's like, I don't know. And so he hasn't changed frames.
I love it. And is that more of a European thing?
I think he's
that's
very
just
calculated.
a rider?
It's just a calculated thing. He just wants things a certain way, and that's it. And you say, back to Johnny's point, Vial's just boring, and that's because he's so calculated. Yep. So it's like he weighs everything, where Deegan is like the exact opposite. You see it in his riding, but even if you listen to him talk about his bike setup, I heard someone ask, I think it was Moseman actually, he asked him, which goes back to my other point about Moseman asking good questions. He was like, so are you real particular about your clutch lever angle and stuff like that? He's like, nah, man, I just run what I brung. I don't care about any of that. He's like, he doesn't change his bike setup much, but for the complete opposite reason, that he just doesn't care. So it's kind of, you see both of those personalities coming out.
The Vial reminds me a lot of Purcell, very precise and very meticulous, and the results speak for themselves.
Yep.
Good stuff.
Well, guys, we are right at 2 hours, and I've been hearing some stuff in the chat about doing like Monday night stuff. So, gotta think about some things here, because it might make sense here. But
hey, also FYI, somebody in the chat said RJ got hurt, so he's already out for tomorrow.
He's out.
So there's just another guy after 17 races. I mean, it's only 8 for the 250 guys, but still, that's.
But hopefully he's not completely down and out. But that's going to be, it opens the playground up even broader, because you got, like what Shane was saying, you have Thrasher, who was injured and was kind of off everybody's radar, and if he's coming back healthy because he had time off, even though it was forced by injury. Who knows, man? Here we are just in 2 hours, and look at how much the landscape's already changed. So it's going to be an incredible. If we can just get to the starting grid tomorrow, that sounds like it's going to be quite the accomplishment.
Yeah, but it sounds like it's going to be a good season. And Shane and all the viewers, guys, make sure you go to Coach and Shane's YouTube channels in the description below. Help them out. Again, it's a rising tide. Shane, it's always a pleasure having you on the podcast. I love your stuff. So thank you for that. And till next time, let's keep it WFO.